get my share screen working here now, and then we'll get down to it. I guess before I start, though, thanks for inviting me to do the talk here. I hope this is of use to some of you anyways. I've tried to gear it a little bit towards people who might be doing research at sea, but it does focus on some of the research that we've done at the Offshore Safety and Survival Center over the years. If anybody has questions as the presentation goes along, just jump in, interrupt me, or raise your hand. I'm not sure if I'll see it. This is the only thing. So anyway, I'll probably talk for about 35 minutes or so, and then we can have some questions. So let's see. Okay, is this working?
Yep, you're good.
Good. Okay. So I titled my talk today, Perils of the Sea, Improving Maritime Safety Through Applied Research. It's a bit dramatic, but the sea is dramatic, of course. And everybody who lives around here knows how quickly things can change at sea. And everybody's heard lots of stories about different incidents that have caused people to have to survive, for to be able to stay alive so that they can get back home to their families. So the focus of the talk here is going to be really on I'll say the early stages of an incident and some things that you might find useful as researchers, and some of the things that we've done to try and fill in some of the gaps in our understanding about what happens in those early stages. So number one, I guess we always try to prevent accidents from happening at sea. And how do we do this? Well, we have rules and regulations that govern things like ship design and construction of platforms or structures that are on the sea. For example, aquaculture farms and things. We also have rules and regulations that govern the operation of ships and offshore structures. And then we also have risk mitigation strategies that are built into operational procedures that sort of dictate the way things happen when you're working at sea. And we also have training, of course, for people who are working at sea. So this includes training of crew. It would include training of people who are working in different roles, researchers, and even to a lesser extent, passengers on passenger ships. But of course, unfortunately, accidents still happen, and we hear about them routinely. And so these are three examples. The one on the left is one that happened here in 2007. It happened in March when the water temperature was just a little bit below zero. The Nautical Legacy. The one in the middle was an Antarctic one, the MV Explorer, which was a vessel that sank again in 2007. A small passenger vessel. And then the other one is an incident that happened in Svalbard in northern Norway. So this is in the Arctic, the Maxim Gorky, in which, as you can see here, all the passengers on the ship were evacuated to lifeboats and to the ice. Now, the interesting thing about these three incidents is that no lives were lost in any of them. Everybody survived. In the fishing vessel, there were 6 crew members, one of whom entered the ocean in underwear and a t-shirt in March. So the point I want to drive home here is that cold water immersion or exposure to cold survival situations, they can be survivable. And a lot of people are really fatalistic about this, and they say, well, it doesn't matter if I have a flotation device or thermal protection, because if I go in that water, I'm going to die in 5 minutes. And that's not the case. There may be some cases in which that is the case, but it's not necessarily the case. And I think it's really important for people to think about survival at sea in those terms. If you don't prepare for it, if you don't have the right equipment, if you don't know what it is you can do to help yourself, then yeah, okay, you may be at a disadvantage. But it is possible to survive evacuation incidents at sea. So what happens when an accident happens? Well, we need to be prepared for emergency response as well. So we try to prevent it. If all attempts to prevent incidents fail, then we need to prepare for an emergency response. And this is a big part of the maritime industry. We have design procedures for efficient evacuation, especially of passenger vessels. We do training and copious amounts of drills to make sure that people are aware of what they have to do and that they're well practiced. We have integration of protective equipment, or at least hopefully we have integration of protective equipment, such as life jackets that can be worn while you work on the deck of a ship, for example, so that it's not bulky and it doesn't make you too warm and so on. We have life-saving appliances such as lifeboats and life rafts that should be appropriate for the application. So if you're sailing in the Arctic, for example, you need to have something that can give you thermal protection. If you're sailing in warmer climates, that might not be necessary. And we have emergency signaling devices and search and rescue. So these are all the things that are put into place and are designed and are developed to allow people to still have a chance if an emergency happens. So for the response phase, everybody needs to be prepared. So that includes crew and people who are working, but it also includes people who might be supernumeraries, such as researchers on research vessels or on regular vessels that you may be doing research, or people who are working on aquaculture farms, for example. So if you're working in that location, you need to know what your risks are. You need to be prepared for those, the potential hazards, so that you do have a chance if you end up in cold water. And just to give an example, the Ocean Researcher 5 incident, which happened in Taiwan. This was a new vessel, 2 years old. It sank in 2014. It was less than 2 miles from shore. It had a crew of 18, and there were 27 scientists on board. The vessel got into heavy seas. It struck a coral reef. It sank. The search and rescue nearby dispatched 8 rescue helicopters, 2 C-130 planes, 4 frigates, and 5 patrol boats. And the result was there were 2 deaths. All the crew were rescued, but 2 scientists lost their lives. So it can happen when you're out there doing research, and you really need to think about that. When we talk about the fishing industry in particular, everybody knows that there are a lot of risks in the fishing industry, and there are a lot of reasons for those risks, and they're not always easy risks to mitigate or problems to solve. But the Transportation Safety Board, which is the board in Canada which investigates accidents, it called out, I guess, the fishing industry in 2018, where they found that there was a big problem. They saw a big spike of deaths in the fishing industry, and they were largely due to a lack of flotation, so no personal flotation device, and a lack of emergency signaling devices. And I'll talk about that in some detail later, but what I mean there is a personal locator beacon. So it's a little device that you can wear that sends an emergency signal so that somebody can know that you're in trouble and that you need help. So the research that we've been doing at the Offshore Safety and Survival Center it will fill our gaps in knowledge about the performance and use of these 2 devices. More so on the PLBs, we're starting to do some work in the area of flotation devices as well, and integration of PLBs with PFDs. So by doing research, we can better understand the emergency response area, and we can improve our level of preparedness. So we need to understand specific things, how people behave, but also how equipped they are to perform certain tasks in emergency situations. We need to know how the equipment is going to perform. And we need to know how overall systems such as search and rescue are likely to perform. So today, as I've mentioned already, I'm going to talk about the research that we've been doing at the OSSC, which might have particular relevance to the School of Fisheries. I hope it's beneficial for research and technical personnel, for research scientists, and for management who might be trying to make decisions about where people might be going, for example. And so when I give talks, I frequently I always use this slide, because I think it helps to kind of contextualize the space that we're living in. So again, all of our efforts to prevent an incident have failed, and now something has happened which requires somebody to be rescued. And that typically, it might not necessarily include the first phase, which is evacuation, because it might be a situation where you've fallen overboard. Maybe you've gotten entangled in a piece of equipment that you're deploying and you've fallen overboard. So the evacuation might not be relevant. But certainly once you've left the vessel, whether it's by choice or by accident or by necessity, you will need to survive for a period of time before you can be rescued. And this really is the context of this, a lot of this research. The research has to address all three stages of that continuum, particularly for large vessels. But again, when you're talking about fishing vessels where you're closer to the water, the evacuation might be accidental immersion. So what are your survival needs? And I'm stealing this from a colleague of mine, Joe Costello, who's over in Mike Tipton's lab in the UK, which I thought was a really nice way to, again, put your head in the space of, okay, what do you need to survive? And in fact, this really applies to everyday life, but in particular, for survival situations, it helps to frame things. So number one, first and foremost, you need oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, your survival time will be in the range of seconds to minutes. And so I'm showing some pictures on the bottom here that give you some ideas about, so, okay, this is a smoke hood that you might wear if you're a crew member on a ship. This is a breathing apparatus that a firefighter might wear. If you have to go into a smoke-filled environment, you need to have oxygen. So these things help ensure that you do. If you're escaping from a helicopter, you might need an emergency breathing apparatus to give you time to get to the surface. If you're a scuba diver, that's an obvious one. You can only dive for a short period of time, seconds to minutes, before you're going to need oxygen. Astronauts, that's an obvious one. And then, of course, the one that probably is most relevant for us here today is flotation. And I put in our four-legged friends here as well, because they might need flotation as well. But when it comes to the initial stages of an incident, if you don't have flotation, then you may likely find it very difficult to stay on the surface and breathe air, which you desperately need to survive. After oxygen, you need thermal protection. This really, I should say thermal regulation, but again, in the context of cold survival, let's call it thermal protection. If you're in the desert, you also need to regulate your temperature within the range that the body likes to be or needs to be. So whether you're surviving on the ice, for example, you do need thermal protection. You lose heat if you don't have sufficient insulation. But particularly in cold water survival situations, you need thermal protection. And in a lot of cases, these this suit, for example, and this suit, which are both marine abandonment immersion suits, they also provide, or they tend to provide, flotation as well. So you get 2 for 1 in that case. But also a snowmobiler who might be going across the ice, for example. Thermal protection is important, as is flotation in this instance. So if you don't have thermal protection or sufficient thermal protection, your survival time is going to be in the range of minutes to hours, typically. Next to that, you need hydration. So this one is fairly straightforward. We all need to consume water to be able to survive. If you don't have hydration, then your survival time you would expect to be in the range of hours to days. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is food. If you don't have sufficient food, your survival time is going to be in the range of days to weeks. You may wish you were getting this in a survival situation, but this is typically what you're getting, which is a very tasteless energy ration. So in the context of what we're talking about today, I'll be focusing on these first two, this seconds to minutes, minutes to hours, because when you're talking about research vessels, okay, unless you're sailing in the Arctic, you're probably well equipped to notify search and rescue and all those things. If you're in something like an Arctic situation, hydration and food become much more important, because your survival period may be on the range of 5 to 10 days, in which case you would definitely need hydration, and food is an asset. So in the early stages of an incident, here are some just general thoughts that I had. do you have flotation? If no, then you're off to a bad start. So the lesson, you should always wear your PFD in exposed areas, in particular in exposed areas, on deck, for example. Now, were you able to raise an alarm before you abandoned? If no, if you went overboard accidentally, or if your radio didn't work, or if you don't have an EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon, then that's not good, because there's a good chance that somebody might not know, or it's a good chance that nobody will know an incident has happened. So the lesson is, you should always wear a personal locator beacon, for example, if you're in the fishing industry, and you should know how to use it. And that's really important as well. Early notification of an incident usually means reduced exposure time before rescue. And that is, again, very important when you consider what your survival needs are. So if you can reduce your survival time to hours or minutes even, then thermal protection becomes less important if you don't have it. And do you have thermal protection? If you don't, then if you have flotation and early notification, then thermal protection, it's always nice to have, but you do still stand a chance of surviving that incident. So what is a personal locator beacon? So I've talked about flotation, that's an obvious one. But I want to talk mostly for the next few slides about personal locator beacons. And in particular, these are good for use in the fishing industry, but also if you're doing a lot of work on deck, or in an area where you're working alone, for example, where you might not have a method for communicating the events of an incident. So a PLB, a personal locator beacon, it's an emergency radio transmitter. And if we look at our person in the water who's wearing his flotation, I might add, the PLB is this device down here, which transmits a signal to a GPS satellite, transmits it to a COSPAS-SAR satellite, which is a series of satellites that are in different orbit levels around the Earth. The PLB detects its position eventually from the GPS satellite. Once the signal reaches the satellite system, it's relayed to essentially to a rescue center. It goes through another step there, but there's no need to talk about that. The rescue center confirms that the signal that's coming from the person in the water is indeed a real potential for an incident, because there are some cases in which there might be a person who's activated this on shore, and search and rescue doesn't need to respond. So they will always confirm, or try to confirm, that first before they deploy their assets. So again, this gives, number one, an indication that something has happened, an emergency has happened. Number two, eventually a position for the survivor. And that can take a period of minutes. It's not usually longer than a few minutes before a position is given to search and rescue, and they have an idea of where to go. These devices have been used for a long time. They have saved countless lives. They are extremely useful devices. The marketplace is flooded with lots of different devices, which are PLBs, which are devices that transmit to the satellites, but they also provide a local homing signal as well. But there are lots of other devices that are subscription-based as well, like Spot and I can't think of any of the other ones right now. But a PLB, strictly speaking, is a device that is used only for emergency situations, and that's the focus of what we're talking about here now. So they're used worldwide. They save many lives onshore every year, onshore and at sea every year. But it's important because during some research that we've been doing, we've noticed that in certain situations, they seem to be, the range at which you can detect them seems to be reduced in higher sea states. So we started doing some research to look at the effect of sea conditions and other deployment conditions on the effectiveness of the PLB transmissions. And so basically what we're talking about here is, with a person in the water in flat calm conditions, line of sight transmission to, let's say, a rescue boat that might be detecting, does that range in ideal conditions, reduce when you get into rougher conditions where you might have waves blocking the signals or less frequent receipt of signals. So you can also imagine this is a pretty pessimistic case. If you have a case where the person is on the crest of a wave and the vessel is also on the crest of a wave, then you might actually pick up a signal, but it might be very, very short or uncertain. So we wanted to know, does sea state affect the detection range for PLBs? Is there a measurable impact on signal detection as the conditions worsen? And also, how important is the antenna? I don't know if you can see on this mannequin here, there's the black line that's sticking up here. Some of these PLBs are designed so that when they're deployed, the antenna goes into the optimal orientation. In some cases, you as a user need to do that. And if you don't know what is the best orientation, then you may actually put your antenna in a less than perfect orientation. So that's what I mean by antenna orientation. So this is some work that we did at sea in December of 2019. We used the Marine Institute's vessel, the MV Inquisitor, and we did the testing off St. John's. So we were looking at the effect of PLB antenna orientation, the receiver antenna height, so how far above the water the antenna was, and you can see these are the receivers at the lowest point, and we also did testing with these mounted on the top of the wheelhouse of the vessel as well. So we had some moderate conditions up to about 2.7 meter waves with gale force winds at times. In fact, I think some of the conditions were a bit worse than that, but the test where the wave buoy is located is what we had to go on. So, and we compared our results in these rougher conditions with what we did in calm conditions, so optimal conditions. And what we found was indeed that you could measure a reduction in the signal strength. And that the orientation of the antenna has a small effect on the detection range. However, the results weren't statistically significant, so we can't say that there is a substantial difference in the detection range depending on the sea state and the orientation of the antenna. There's a small effect, but it's not statistically significant. So, which is a good finding. I was a little bit surprised, to be honest, but it's a good finding because that indicates that indeed these devices really are functioning well with very small changes in their detection range as the conditions worsen. We also found that, and this is to be expected, but we wanted to see if we could actually measure it at sea, that the height of the antenna that's receiving those signals is important, of course, which is the reason why they're always placed on the top of a wheelhouse. But being able to actually measure that at sea was a useful thing for us to do. This is work that's been done by graduate student Josh Ryan, who's now writing up his thesis. He was funded through the Ocean Frontier Institute Module I-4 on the first round of funding. And then we also had some anecdotal evidence that that beacons can be difficult to activate in certain conditions, whether that's an understanding of how to activate them, which I guess essentially reverts to a training question. Or whether you're able to actually feel the buttons, specifically when you're exposed to cold water. You should activate these devices, as soon as you can. But if your hands are cold, maybe you can't feel the buttons. And we're wondering if some configurations might be better than others. So the performance standard in Canada requires that, and this is put forward by the National Search and Rescue Secretariat in a document that was published in 2000, PLB shall be capable of being activated by one person with mitts in thermal extremes, rain, ice, spray, packed snow, and dirt. So this is the performance standard, and like many performance standards, it doesn't indicate, for example, if the mitts have to be this thin or that thick. So if you're wearing, for example, neoprene gloves that might be attached to an immersion suit, are you able to actually activate those devices? So the testing that we're going to do first, we'll start off by doing some standardized tests, and this will hopefully build on some research that was done by Matthew Ray and Liz Sanley and Heather Carnahan and Carrie-Ann Ennis and myself to get a baseline measure of performance for participants. And then what we're planning to do is have a blind test where we have a range of different configurations for PLBs, where we're looking at different button sizes and textures to determine if there's any difference in activation time and whether the feedback received from the people indicates that, could they in fact actually feel these buttons. And this is important to approach it this way because we want to remove a learning effect here. Because I think it's often safe to assume that people don't necessarily familiarize themselves with these devices when they buy them. Some people will, some people won't. But what we want to know is, can a person feel them if they can't see them, which is a realistic situation if a person is in the water with a PLB mounted to their PFD, their flotation device, but they're unable to see where the buttons are. And so what we're hoping is that the outcomes of this research will be useful to people who manufacture PLBs, but also to regulators, and maybe they'll be willing to set some more stringent standards so that people actually can have a more of a fighting chance with these devices. And ultimately, we hope it's going to benefit the user community. So that could be fish harvesters, it could be researchers working at sea, it could be anybody who's at sea, a recreational boater. And this is work that's being carried out by master's student Alexandria Major, who's also funded by OFI Module I-4. And because of COVID, unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the testing phase of this yet. So we're crossing our fingers and hoping that we can get approval for face-to-face research with research participants soon. Now, that's the initial stage where you've gone in the water, you've got your flotation, you've hopefully got some thermal protection, but you might not, and you've been able to raise the alarm. So if you raise the alarm, typically you're shorter in your survival phase. If you haven't raised the alarm, that could go on for a detrimentally long period. What we've done in some of this research, and this was work that was done a number of years ago now, and Carrie-Ann Ennis, my colleague in our department, did her master's on this work, is to look at the heat loss mechanisms and rates of survival in life raft and to do some modeling. Now, it was a large team. We had people from the National Research Council, where we actually did the experiments, to ourselves at the Marine Institute and people at Defence R&D Canada and Helly Hansen and so on. We looked at the effect of different life raft floor insulation levels. And if we go back to the performance standard that's expected for activation of PLBs, the performance standard for insulation in life rafts simply states that life rafts shall have insulation in their floors. So the guidance is not provided as to how much insulation should be there. So we were seeing numerous different types of materials being used for insulation in life raft floors, and we wanted to test that and see just how good it was, or if it was good enough. And we also wanted to look at the effect of different personal protective equipment that people might be wearing. So whether it's a wetsuit or just cotton clothing with a life jacket, or whether it's the thermal protective aid, a thin foil lined device, or if it's an immersion suit, as well as whether people were wet or dry. And this is the summary of 3 years of work, and I won't go into this graph in any detail, but basically our system insulation is noted on the y-axis. The different conditions along the x-axis indicate the levels of insulation provided by each of these different combinations. So I wet means insulated wet with 10 centimeters of water on the floor. U wet means uninsulated floor wet. U wet foam means uninsulated floor, wet conditions, foam floor, and so on, all the way up to insulated, dry with a thermal protective aid. The red lines indicate the ambient conditions. the ambient conditions where at a 20 degrees Celsius, plus 20 degrees Celsius ambient condition, everybody is able to survive to a point where their core temperature, their core temperature of their body reaches 28 degrees Celsius. So this is bare bones survival, basically. If we come to harsher conditions, 0 degrees Celsius, we see that there are a few cases actually that you can still survive for the period of time. When you hit ambient conditions of -10, there are only 2 conditions that would allow you to survive for a period where your core temperature would drop to 28 degrees Celsius. And this graph also, so this gives survival time as a function, so survival time on the y-axis and average air and water temperature on the x-axis. So the assumption here is that the person is wet and they're inside an inflatable life raft, something like what we see here, and that they don't have any insulation in the floor underneath their backside. There are 4 curves here. The dashed curves are the survival time to 28 degrees Celsius, and the solid curves are the functional survival time. So this is deemed to be a condition where you might be able to assist yourself in survival. So you're hypothermic, but you're still functional. Survival, bare minimum survival, means you're alive, but you are expected not to be able to help yourself. So if we just pick one temperature, we see that a functional time for this set of curves, you will be expected to be able to survive for about 9 hours. So inside a raft, wet, with no insulated floor, your functional survival time would be about 9 hours. Bare bones survival time would be after about 13 hours. Now, when we go to this next curve, we see that we might last for about 22 hours, or your functional, your bare bones survival time 29 hours. Now, what's the difference between these 2 sets of curves? It's the inclusion of one of these very simple foil-lined thermal protective aids that you find you can get them in Canadian Tire. They're contained within the SOLAS survival pack that's packed inside of life rafts. So without this, you can be expected to last from 9 to 13 hours. If you add something just simple like this, and you're still wet inside of that, your survival time more than doubles. So that was quite a surprise to us in our research. So if you're surviving inside a life raft, this is a piece of equipment that's provided, and you should use it, absolutely. The challenge, of course, is that in non-Arctic situations, or the problem, I guess, not really the challenge, in non-Arctic situations, these are only provided for 10% of the people that the craft is rated to carry. So, and they're very delicate. They are very effective, but they are delicate as well. So it will be difficult to wear this for a while to warm yourself up and then take it off and pass it to the next person. So it's amazing to me that they're not required for everybody on board. In the Arctic, they are. They have to have one of these for everybody. In lower latitudes, they're not required for everybody. So if your raft is rated to carry 16 people, then you'll get 2 of them. So moving on from survival, so this is a big jump to survival. So thinking again in the context of our continuum here, so we've gone to the sea, we've been in this survival mode for a period of time. These last few slides have been research that we've done that relates to use of life rafts. So I'm not talking about people directly in the water. Now what I'm going to talk about a little bit is search and rescue. And so we're almost through here now. I think I probably have another 5 minutes maybe. So SAR, search and rescue. So a project that we're just starting up now through another Ocean Frontier Institute project. It's called FOCI. It stands for Future Ocean and Coastal Infrastructures. The work package that the Marine Institute is leading is to develop a model, a probabilistic model of search and rescue. And so the idea here is to use what we know about how people perform, how equipment performs, and then develop a probabilistic model that will allow you to assess the SAR performance for different scenarios. So whether you have a fishing vessel where the people have abandoned to the water directly, or a cruise ship where people have abandoned to the lifeboats or life rafts with a certain number going to the water, we by the end of the project, we'll be able to test these different scenarios at different locations, so different places from where the search and rescue assets are located, for different types of assets and different configurations of assets, as well as for different players. And what I mean there is obviously public resources, so the Canadian Coast Guard and DND through their fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft, as well as civilian resources. So this would be vessels of opportunity and the Coast Guard auxiliary, and things like the offshore resources that we have sailing back and forth to the rigs on any given day. These are very highly trained individuals, and they know how to perform rescue. How do we mix all these things together and get a sense for how well the system can perform? And this is just a diagram to kind of show our thinking at the early stages of this anyway. So on the input side, we have environmental parameters. So we have statistical distributions for environmental parameters, performance parameters, the incident scenario parameters, and the communications parameters. So that's communications between the different organizations that are involved. In the generalized model, we have the Coast Guard Marine, Civilian Marine, the Coast Guard Auxiliary. In northern areas, we could have the Rangers and the different communities, and so on. And then at the other side of the model, we would be able to determine the time to reach the location, or the distribution of times to reach the location, the search time that's required. So we could, for example, model the input of PLBs versus not PLBs, not having PLBs, rescue time overall, and the system capacity. And so, as I say, this is work that's just beginning now, but hopefully we can give some presentations on this at a later time. This is currently involving a master's student, Evan Lane, and hopefully we'll be bringing a couple of more master's students on board in September. So what's the point of all this if we don't use our research? And so I thought it'd be useful to point out that we disseminate our results, obviously, through technical reports and international journal and conference publications that are peer-reviewed. We do seminar and workshop presentations, and we organize, or we help to organize, international conferences and workshops as well. We're also highly engaged at the regulatory and the standards level. So we try to provide input based on the findings of our research to the International Maritime Organization. So we've had some success with the evacuation analysis requirements for passenger ships, as well as development or redevelopment of the life-saving appliance code for Arctic operations. The International Standards Organization, so we've been involved in escape, evacuation, and rescue standards development for oil and gas in the Arctic, or oil and gas development in the Arctic. And GSK and PSK, that stands for Group Survival Kit and Personal Survival Kit for Arctic survival situations. So that's that's a standard that's just about to be published. The Canadian Standards Association, as well as the Canadian General Standards Board. So we've had involvement as well in helicopter passenger transportation suit system. And then, of course, we are also engaged in doing peer-reviewed journals and conference papers, and reviewing master's and PhD defenses. So we're engaged at all levels of the academic and regulatory areas. We're also regularly engaged with the Newfoundland and Labrador Fish Harvesting Safety Association. So they're aware of the work that we're doing with PLBs, and we're talking with them about PFDs as well, so flotation and locator devices. We're involved in an international PFD research working group, Transport Canada Marine Safety, the Newfoundland and the Nova Scotia Petroleum Boards. And we also talk regularly with equipment designers and manufacturers, whether that's PFD manufacturers or designers, life raft and abandonment systems like chutes and slides, as well as rescue devices like scrambling nets. And as well, of course, we're one of the founding organizations involved in the International Association for Safety and Survival Training. So in summary, The sea can be a dangerous place, but it is possible to survive an abandonment if you're prepared, and that is the key. Everybody has a responsibility to be prepared. You've got to protect yourself and think about the things that I remember the first time I went to sea for research, and my cabin mates made fun of me because I took out my immersion suit and checked the zippers and made sure everything was there before we left the wharf. And I thought, well, I'd rather take my chances and be made fun of than I'd rather be made fun of than take my chances, and hoping that the suit is going to be adequate. So this applies to everybody. This is fish harvesters, this is ship's crew, people who are working in the offshore, graduate students, researchers. If you don't know, you should ask somebody. If you don't know and you ask somebody and they don't know, you should talk to the people at the Offshore Safety and Survival Center or ourselves. Recreational boaters, even ship's passengers have a role to play. When you board a ship, a ferry, a cruise ship, pay attention to the mustering trials that you do. Pay attention to the announcements that are made on the screens and by the captain or the crew. These can be really important. It can mean the difference between life and death. PLBs, they're really important for raising an alarm early. And our research shows that the impact of weather is actually minimal on detection range. The ongoing research, we hope to be able to offer some optimal activation arrangements for these devices, but even as they are very useful, and they're well worth the investment of a couple of $100s. The thermal protection research that we've done has shown that insulation in the floors of life rafts is really important. Now, one thing I didn't really talk about earlier was the different types of materials that are being used. And in fact, they all offer really surprising improvement in thermal protection over nothing. So floors that can inflate should be inflated. Floors that have bubble wrap are almost as good as inflatable floors, which was a surprise to us. And floors that have closed cell foam are also almost as good as inflatable floors. And this research that we've done also shows the impact of personal protective equipment on survival time. So if you have something, then you should use it. Our new research in the modeling of search and rescue, we hope will enable us to do objective assessments of the SAR system capacity and look at the importance of the opportunistic elements of search and rescue. So the civilian, incorporating the civilian within the public resources. And it's really important that that the research get put out there for other researchers to use. So publishing is really important, so that practitioners and trainers can use as much as possible. Regulators in development of regulations, and designers and manufacturers also sometimes are craving information and research results so that they can make their products better. That's about all I had to say. We're at about 45 minutes here now. So if anyone has any questions, I guess we can open up the floor.
If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and type in the chat window, or you can unmute yourself.
I'm just going to stop sharing here, Riona, and
hi there. Well, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. So, well, very interesting talk. We are having, we are going to be working in Gull Island and Great Island this year, and we have been, well, in my lab we have purchased like a small Zodiac to actually do this kind of short trips. And we are now in the process of elaborating like safety equipment list and the safety training that we are going to be doing amongst ourselves. Like myself personally, I have a skipper's license from Spain, so I don't know how is if it's valid here or not. But like I have experience in boating. But you guys have much more experience than I have. So do you have any like recommendations? If whether we should like purchase these personal location beacons, or
what's the nature of the work you'll be doing? Will you be on vessels?
No, it's just mainly transport between mainland and Gull and Great Island. So it's just we are not going to be in the ocean more than just the transport between mainland and the ocean and the island.
And then you'll be working on the island. So
Yeah.
getting to the island is
Yeah.
what you're wondering about. How
Yeah.
long is the voyage?
Like
And what
it's
sort of
it's
vessel will you be traveling on?
so we have like a small Zodiac, like 12 feet, 12 and a half feet with the engines at the back. That we are getting probably a 25 horsepower. So all in all, we are going to take like less than half an hour to get there.
Right. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, you will definitely want flotation.
Yeah, yeah, I know
Um,
that's man. Yeah, yeah.
And I would, because you're traveling in a Zodiac, I still think it's a good idea to have a personal locator beacon. A Zodiac, if it was a larger vessel, the vessel itself would have what's called an EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon. So it's like a big PLB basically, with
Okay.
larger battery and greater power output. Pardon me. But a Zodiac won't have that. At least it's very unlikely that it will have that. So I think it's also a good idea to have a PLB. And how many of you are going to be traveling this way?
Like at max 4 at a time.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I mean it is a good investment, and you can send yeah, okay. So if four of you will go to the island and then it will be going back to pick up more people to bring them out, you could also share the
Share
PLBs,
the things. Yeah. Okay.
So you could buy as many as you need for a single trip, for example. And the other thing, of course, is thermal protection. So a Zodiac is a very capable vessel, but you're also very close to the water. So it kind of comes down to a risk assessment of whether or not you would require an immersion suit or some sort of thermal protection. The water in Gull Island is and what time of the year?
Yeah, we're talking summer and just in good conditions. Like we are not forced to do anything in rough seas.
Right, so you can decide when you go and when you don't
Yeah.
go. Yeah, yeah. It's a question, I guess, about the thermal protection. Myself, I would like to have it because even in good conditions, things can go wrong.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that it as long. I mean, I have been in Zodiacs without I'll say watertight thermal protection, but it's probably not a bad idea either. If you had say, for example, 4 immersion suits that you could send back to people who might, if you have to make a second trip. It might be possible to rent something even. You might not even need to buy it. You might be able to rent it from one of the shops, but having it is not a bad idea. It always helps to be prepared.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's just so many doubts and yeah, thank you for the help.
Yeah, this is the problem, of course, is that the cost is it absolutely does add to the cost, no question about it. But the question then becomes, well, what is it worth if you're in the water without it? It'd be worth quite a lot then, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Any other questions? I'd like to hear the thoughts of not to put anyone on the spot, but there are a couple of people from the OSSC in Foxtrot. I'm wondering if you have a different opinion as to what my answer was just then. Nobody wants to speak up? Okay. Is there another? There was the question that went to the chat. Okay. Espodge, we rent suits. We rent suits from Spartan. Yeah, locally. That's right. Spartan Marine is out in on Topsail Road. So you might be able to rent suits from Spartan, Spartan.
Yeah, I'm writing down all these names. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And another, I'm not sure if these other places would rent them, but Nord Marine, Nord, Blue Water Marine, and Newfoundland Marine Safety Services. So those, any of those might also rent the suits. And I see a response there from Troy Nolan, who's one of the trainers in Foxtrek. He said you would definitely want a suit when transferring to and from the island.
Yeah,
And I was assuming that you're transferring via a wharf, but if you're not transferring to shore via a wharf, then you'd want some sort of protection there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a landing site. Like I haven't been myself there yet, but for what I heard, it's like a landing site of like a pebble beach or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, something at least for the feet, like a wader or something like that is what I was thinking. But yeah, I mean, everything comes to budget, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, you might be able to rent something rather than, but if you're going to be sending people there for an extended period of time, then it might be worthwhile to think about purchasing something so that everybody is adequately protected.
Okay, I will give a look to prices and everything, and let's see what supervisor feels about it. All right, thank you for the help.
Any other questions or comments? Nope, everyone's good. I guess, Riona, maybe we can leave it there if you'd like.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining, and thanks Rob for the talk. And yeah, I guess we'll see you next week for anyone who wants to join in.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. And if anyone has any questions, you can reach me by email, rob.brown@mi.mun.ca.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Bye everyone.
See you.